Are you feeling lonely, disconnected, distant from your spouse? In today's episode, we're going to talk about the red flags of how spiritual warfare can impact our marriage, making us lonely, disconnected, and distant from each other. Adele and I are so excited to have Gary Thomas with us for this interview. He is a best-selling author, international speaker, teaching pastor, and full of wealth and wisdom. He has some incredible wisdom around betrayal inside marriage.
Spiritual warfare would be, don't put yourself in a vulnerable situation when you're in a marriage that is distant and lonely, because you can be carried away faster than you can imagine because of that.
What are the red flags of spiritual warfare in marriage?
One, that you're alive.
Exactly.
If you're alive, there's spiritual warfare. What's the difference between Flight 93 on 9/11 that didn't reach the White House and the two flights that hit the World Trade Center Twin Towers and the Pentagon? The people on Flight 93 figured out we're in a war, and they fought against it. Those other three planes didn't have a clue what was going on. And I think as Christians, sometimes we're just letting Satan plot against us, and we're not acting like he's real. C.S. Lewis had a great comment in his brilliant way. It's possible to be superstitious or substitious. Superstitious is you see the devil behind everything. You're casting him out. You're binding him out. I don't get into that. But then he warns of substitious, where you're pretending that he doesn't even exist. He is not an anti-God in the sense of he's a God who's just evil. He's a created being. He's not omnipresent. I don't want to give him more than his due, but he is active. Paul says in Ephesians 6, to put on the full armor of God, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, the powers, the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. Peter says the devil prowls around like a roaring lion, waiting for whom to devour. Jesus said to pray regularly against the evil one. So Paul, Peter, and Jesus agree spiritual warfare is real. It's not a matter of if your family is facing spiritual warfare. It's a matter of how and when. And so I think just being aware is a big part of the battle. When my wife and I were in a pro-life ministry, we would have our worst fights of the year a week before our annual directors conference.
I believe it.
It was a big thing for the ministry. And like the third time it's happened, we're like, wait a minute here.
Yep.
This twice might be curious. Three times you're starting to think. And then you go further in Ephesians 6 where Paul says our battle is not against flesh and blood. Well, what are we made out of? Flesh and blood. What are your kids made out of? Flesh. My battle's not with them. So I think it's superstitious to assume Satan is behind every disagreement. It's naive to assume he's not behind many of them. And to recognize as parents, how might Satan be trying to turn your kids against you? How might he be lying to them and deceiving them? And recognizing your battle isn't with your kid. It's against Satan, who has a design to ruin your kid, to turn them away from your authority, to turn them away from your love, to turn them away from their God. And so I would say the red flags are dissension is a big one. Where Satan comes in, he loves to bring in division and dissension, factions and envy, all of those things. When we serve a God of reconciliation, we're reconciled to God through the work of Christ so that we could be reconciled to each other. That's 1 Corinthians. And so if there isn't unity and there isn't peace, that's a big sign of spiritual warfare.
So we can be having a great conversation. We can really be in a good mood with each other. But then I hear her say something and I interpret it as she's no longer on my team anymore, that she's judging me, that whatever she's saying is making me feel not good enough or feel like a failure. And it makes me want to like lash back out at her, become defensive with her. Is that exactly what you're talking about?
I don't think that's necessarily spiritual warfare, Travis. Sometimes I think that's where we need to do our soul work to be healthy. Defensiveness and misunderstanding it can be two issues that are rooted even in our childhood more than in Satan. For instance, some people that are defensive have this notion If my husband doesn't love everything about me, he hates me. Okay, practically, that's impossible. If the Bible says you stumble in many ways, for your husband to love everything about you, he would have to love some sin. He'd have to love some limitation. And so the wife has to get over that sense that I have to be perfect to him or I'm nothing to him. It's not fair. You can't have a healthy marriage with that kind of defensiveness. That's rooted in how she sees herself, probably rooted from some of the way she was raised and the messages she's telling herself. So I think that's more of a relational issue on that. And you got to check. Now, I think Satan can exacerbate it. I think he can emphasize it. And then I think what Paul says to put on the belt of truth. Classic example, a couple I knew, married 3 months. She's taking a blouse off a hanger in the morning getting dressed. She puts the hanger back up there and the husband looks at her like, I know you're doing that just to bug me. She's like, what are you talking about? He goes, putting that naked hanger up there? She had never heard the phrase naked hanger. She really didn't know what he was talking about until he explained that once you take a piece of clothing off a hanger, it's a naked hanger. And you're supposed to put it together in the corner of the closet. She looked at his closet. There's this little nudist colony of hangers, right? All comfortably naked together, not embarrassed because she was not doing it to bug him. She didn't have a clue that was a thing. And that's where I think the belt of truth is.
Yes. Are
you really saying that just to bug me? Or am I just misinterpreting what you're doing? And that's where we get to the superstitious angle. It's like we have to balance it. This might just be my own defensiveness, my own hurt issues, so that I don't make marriage more difficult than it needs to be. But also when you've got ministry coming up or something, I think it's naive to assume Satan isn't trying to milk that for all it's worth. And he uses deception. So yeah. I think just call it out. Is this what you really mean? Am I reading you right? Am I jumping to conclusions and trying to apply truth to combat spiritual warfare?
Yeah.
Thank you
great.
for that. Would you happen to have another practical example of what a spiritual warfare would look like in a marriage?
Specifically, if you can direct it around betrayal or before betrayal.
Yeah. Certainly. I think affairs can be, I think Satan can fan the flames. And that's why one of the things that Paul says in Ephesians 6 is put on the breastplate of righteousness. Because wherever I give in to sin, I'm given into spiritual warfare. In her book, Making Your Marriage a Fortress, we have an account of a woman who had an affair. And I think it was so helpful because I think this is more typical how she waded into the affair. She said, Gary, it wasn't about lust. If I would have looked at him a year before, I never thought I have to have him. It wasn't about because I fell in love. It's about because she lived with unfulfilled desires in her marriage. Her and her husband were acres apart. And you can put up with that for a while, but eventually you get lonely. And when you get lonely, you get vulnerable. So when this guy just wants to talk to her, she probably spends too much time talking to him. And then she finds herself going out of her way to run into him because she misses the talk. And then she lets him flirt with her instead of shutting down. Hey, I'm married. You can't talk to me like that. She kind of likes it. Hey, that guy's flirting with me, which is why she agreed to go to a bar with him after work, which again, she shouldn't have, and she wouldn't have gone straight from nothing to the bar. It was, we talked too much. I'm seeking him out. I let him flirt. Let's go to a bar. And so she let him kiss her, which led to the next week where they met at a hotel. And so you can look at this anatomy of an affair. There's this, and this. She wouldn't have gone from up here to boom down there. But without the breastplate of righteousness, you have one compromise, another compromise. If you start compromising, you can go a long ways, a lot further than you think. Now, in their case, as you know, I think you have experienced, God did an amazing work. And I'm hesitant to say this. They would never say have an affair so you could get closer. That
right,
that'd be obscene. But they said we would never go back to the marriage we had before the affair.
Yeah, I would agree.
It's like the affair woke us up, showed us how bad things were, and then gave us the tools. Working through the betrayal, working through the forgiveness, working through the communication, gave us the tools to have a marriage that we treasure now. We'd never want to go back. Now, of course, they wish they could have gotten that without an affair. But this is just for your listeners. If they're in a lonely marriage, don't take that first step. Don't start talking to the old boyfriend on Facebook. Another couple mentioned to us where he saw so many affairs start at CrossFit with wives, because they've shown that if your heartbeat is above, I think it's 150, you create a level of vulnerability that can lead to intimacy, which is why when they do marriage conferences, they do the high ropes thing, or they try to go out of their way to get your heartbeat up. Well, think about it. You're in a CrossFit. You feel distant from your husband. You've got this male trainer that's encouraging, you can do it, come on. And then he's got to adjust your form. So let me grab your hips, or let me speak these words of encouragement. And your heartbeat is up. Before you know it, your emotions are raging, and it can lead to an affair. And so I would say spiritual warfare would be, don't put yourself in a vulnerable situation when you're in a marriage that is distant and lonely, because you can be carried away faster than you can imagine because of that.
What are some things they could do to improve their marriage when they're lonely?
It depends if the other spouse is cooperative or not.
Sure.
Some spouses, if you'd say, look, I'm not happy, this isn't working for me, they're going to take it seriously. They're going to say, let's talk to someone, let's figure out what's going on. And then I would say, just do the work. Say, we've just gotten busy, I'm sorry, let's do it. If the other spouse isn't defensive, what do you mean? I'm doing all I can, I'm working because we need the money. It's like, hey, you know what? More than I care about us paying the bills, I care about us staying together. Let's talk about this together. That's a healthy response. The defensive one isn't. I think they're just, it's going to sound like a cliche, but I think studies have shown if you're praying together and you're having sex once or twice a week, those couples almost never get a divorce. And I think the reason is to maintain prayer 3 or 4 times a week and to maintain physical intimacy a couple times a week. I'm not saying that saves your marriage. I mean, you're having to work on a marriage to where you are okay to pray with each other and be intimate with each other. So you redo the fun things, you reprioritize it, you recognize that if you put the kids first, the biggest hit for your kids is if your marriage falls apart. So it's okay to tell your kids, no, you're not going to do those things. Your mom and dad need to go away, maybe for a weekend. So it could be so many things. It could be spiritual intimacy. It could be sexual intimacy. It could be relational intimacy. I would just kind of want to figure out where they're lacking and figure out how to bring in that level of intimacy.
I love that you use prayer in there. And the statistic is 1 in 2 couples average are going to be getting a divorce. Statistically, also 2% or less of church-going people have prayer with their spouse. And the studies have shown that if you do pray with your spouse every day, statistically, you'll go from 1 in 2 getting a divorce to 1 in 1,552 getting a divorce.
It's crazy.
Huge
difference.
Huge.
And I think that's what God's design was for both hearts to be humble, going to Him as their creator and their, guide for their life, for everything. He's the center. And when we're humble and going to Him, like, He wants to bless the marriage.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would like to say that you didn't get a chance today that you're really feeling led to?
Well, yeah, I think it's always the nuance, Adele. When I wrote When to Walk Away, I think when you have a toxic spouse is like chapter, I don't even know, 9 or something like that. And I say, please don't start at this chapter. I said, because you want to set up how Jesus responded and what a toxic person is. There's a difference between a difficult marriage and a toxic marriage and whatnot. And somebody just showed me at one of my last events or told me, Gary, I did exactly what you said. I went first to that chapter and you said, don't start here. And so I would just say, Adele, let's recognize our first call, our highest joy and delight is to worship our beautiful, wonderful Savior, to have our needs met in Him, to gain His affirmation for ourselves, and then to gain His love for our spouse. And then out of that, just pursue each other and continue to pursue, to offer grace, but also recognize that it's a gift that you can give to a cheating spouse or a hurting spouse to call them to holiness. Yeah. Jesus loved the church by washing her with the water of His word. the best thing my wife can do for me is help me to grow in holiness. The best thing I can do for her is to encourage her to grow in holiness. And so you love your spouse, you forgive your spouse, but you should be trying to inspire your spouse as well to not destroy their life and their heart and their soul by treating sin too lightly. I've said in my book, sin isn't just corrupt, it's corrupting. Sin left unchecked is a cancer that is spreading. And you don't always get to decide where you stop. And I've seen it take some people a long ways they never could have imagined, to where some even say they have lost their faith because they didn't deal with their sin. That's tragic, not just for the marriage, but for their relationship with God.
And if you could just say there's this one book, this one resource.
He's got 20.
I know.
Or more.
I know. But there's just one resource, this one book that our listeners really would be effective for them to get. What would it be?
Well, I think as a foundation for this, Sacred Marriage would be the one.
I really appreciate you joining us for this interview. Man, I'm encouraged by what you're saying. There's a lot of hope in what you're saying. And it's really helped me to understand, to be a better coach for these couples that are listening to this and calling us. So thank you for hanging out with us.
Hey, wait a minute. Before you click off this video, would you consider subscribing?
70% of you who are watching this video right now have not even hit the subscribe button. Every week we release a video that will help support you in your healing from betrayal.
So go ahead, hit that subscribe button now. I remember not having a clue of how to set healthy boundaries. Travis and I created a program that is exactly for that. It's a step-by-step program that walks couples through betrayal. Betrayal was one of the most confusing times of my life, and I would have given anything to have a guide to walk me through this. Other couples that have taken this program have experienced healing from betrayal, forgiveness, as well as being able to set healthy boundaries that support the healing and support the marriage. Healing from betrayal can sometimes take years to recover from. That doesn't have to be you. Because of this step-by-step guide, you can access your healing right now from betrayal. So I want to encourage you, check out the link below in the description and see if this program is right for you. Hey, if you found value in this episode, would you give us a like? This tells YouTube that more couples should see this episode. So you are furthering the healing of other couples walking through betrayal just by giving us a like. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for joining us today, and we really hope you join us next week. We'll see you later. Bye.
If I'm going to be in a car with you, we're going to be hanging out, what are we listening to?
Okay. If it's Saturday morning, it's Sirius XM reruns Casey Kasem's American Top 40 from the 70s, which I still maintain is the absolute best decade of pop rock music in the history of music. I mean, when people recover, they're always going to the 70s. And when they did those raps that would mash in, it was usually from the 70s. The Eagles will never grow old. And I just say, if you stick with the Bees, you got the Boston, you got Bee Gees, you got Bad Company, you got the Beatles, and the Beach Boys, of course, the beloved Beach Boys. Go to 70s music. If they start with a B, they're definitely going to be good. But during the week, and maybe because we spent 12 years in Texas, I have gotten more and more into country music because they still sing about God. Yeah. And the men still are really attracted to beautiful women. And it's like, it's not my wife says, this is pajama boy music, or girl, they're just talking about their angst and their loneliness. And I just like, I don't need that. I get enough of that in life or listening to others. But I think it's fun. So I'm getting more and more into country music, which would have shocked me 20 years ago. But I just feel like pop music has just passed me by.
That's great. Your favorite book that you have read or reread, but it's not your own?
Can I give an author instead of a book? Yeah. I mean, I could go nonfiction and fiction. For fiction, it's just the books of Susan Howich. She's a British woman. She wrote a series of long, I mean, like 800 or 900 page novels that were family sagas that had just intrigued me. And then she wrote a 6-part series called the Starbridge Chronicles on the history of the Church of England, where she mixes theology and psychology, is working with clergymen. And I just find them fascinating and enthralling. And the best thing I found about growing older is that when I read her novels 20 years ago and then read them again this year, it felt fresh because I'd forgotten most of it. And so it's like I got to rediscover her all over again. And I read half a dozen of these 900-page novels the first half of this year until I made myself stop to save up for next year. My wife isn't as into her as much as I am, but I just think she's a brilliant novelist. She retired 10 years ago, which I think is really sad, but she's for fiction. For nonfiction, for spiritual formation, I think Dallas Willard has influenced me as much as anybody. I've never read a J.I. Packer book that feels like it's wasting my time. Every one of his books are great. N.T. Wright inspires me. I may not agree everywhere he goes theologically, but he's so brilliant and his books have been so helpful. So I've really appreciated him as well when it comes to theology.
Great. Dog or cat person?
100% dog. People don't deserve dogs. I'm not sure that cats deserve people.
I would agree.
That's great. If we were going to go sit down at a restaurant and you could order any meal you wanted to order, I'm paying, by the way, what are you ordering?
You know, my favorite would be eating at Taste of Texas in Houston, Texas. A well-cooked steak with a baked potato and a salad and their cheesy bread. I'm going to be about as happy as I've ever been. If it's a lunch and I'm more lowbrow, Mexican food, I love pizza, of course, the occasional cheesesteak. Can't really eat those last 3 things if my wife is with me, but but Taste of Texas, if cost isn't a factor and I could travel, that would be the place.
It sounds yummy.
Yes. So for today's your birthday. Happy birthday. And let's say you could make your birthday wish or your birthday prayer. What would that be?
I would just say, because we have 2 grandkids now, 3 children, I just say just an entire family who wakes up seeking first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, that they would get to know the joy, the wonder of walking with God every day. I was spoiled by God when I became a Christian when I was 8, but I don't really have a memory of life apart from God. Mm-hmm. So I've made a ton of mistakes and have had different challenges. I really feel like God has been there literally every step of the way, which has meant more to me than anything. And I want every family member to enjoy that as well.
Beautiful. That's beautiful.
Thank you for all that. That was fun.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
And hey, look forward to talking face to face, and you get to see my bride tomorrow. And
I'm
I'm
excited for
looking
that.
forward to it.
I'm excited.
All right.
Thank you for
We'll
doing
see you.
this. It's been an honor.
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you.
My
Have a great
pleasure.
rest of your birthday.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.